Um, I don't know. I mean, I'm speaking to you in one direction, but I don't know you guys, and I didn't want to intrude on anyone's personal. You guys know each other, and you're a family, and but the things I heard were wonderful. I just heard just snippets of just amazingness coming out of these groups, and so it's very heartwarming. I was talking with someone during the break about the struggle and how hard it is, and I want to tell you a story. And this is a true story. There's someone named Elder Paisius. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And there was a monk who was at the monastery who was a drunk, okay? Drunk monk. And this guy was always, alcohol on his breath, always intoxicated. Everyone knew that's the drunk monk, and he's just kind of, he's drinking vodka all the time, blah, 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 right? And people discounted him and stay away from the drunk guy and this stuff, right? And then when he passes away, as the tradition of the monks, they all gathered around him. And and they smelt this amazing smell of, hanut, and they heard angels, and, this man was taken to heaven. And so they asked Elder Paisius, they said, well, what's the story about this guy? I mean, he's a drunk. Like, we thought he was a bad monk. And he said, let me tell you what his deal was. He was one of those, during World War II, as you all remember, millions of Russians were killed, many fathers, and the orphanages were full of babies, like tons and tons and tons of babies, okay? And you'd have, two women, two nurses, right? And 1,000 babies to take care of. And so the way the nurses dealt with all of this is they would put alcohol in the babies' bottles. They would just drug them, right? Because they can't deal with all of these crying babies, and all, so they just drug the babies. Okay, so all of these kids grew up alcoholics, like alcoholic, like physically dependent on alcohol. And this monk was one of them, and he would he was I hear a leak, and he would drink all the time. And so what he did is he joined the monastery, and he used to have 17 shots of vodka a day to sustain himself. And he spent his entire life working towards having less vodka a day. Not going to AA meetings, nothing, no support. And he worked for a year, and he got himself down to 16 drinks a day. And then after a year or two, 15 drinks, and then 14 drinks, and then 13. And then by the time he died, he was down to 2 or 3 drinks a day. And that's what he could handle. And because of that struggle, Elder Paisius says, this man went to heaven, right? And so he fought his whole life to go from being like a super alcoholic to just a kind of alcoholic. And God in his beauty saw that struggle and that battle and rewarded him for it. Now, for me on the outside, I walked up to a monastery and I see an alcoholic monk, all kinds of judgment, all kinds of hatred, all kinds of, what kind of church is this, and what do they ordain these days, and all of this stuff, right? So the point I want to bring back to is there is no, successful marriage, or we're at a good point, or our marriage is doing well now, or that's just kind of not going to happen, right? It's all about the struggle. The victory is in the struggle. And in Christianity, that's where victory is, right? It's not in reaching some level of goodness or some level of spiritual life or anything like that, right? In fact, the way we think about, thank you very much. Yeah. Do you know how to do it in PowerPoint so that the animations work? Okay. And so the way we think about the spiritual life, don't worry about slides, they'll be fine. The way we think about the spiritual life is we don't think of it in terms of achieving, but we think of it in terms of fighting. So, one of the best ways I think about the spiritual life, the definition of a good spiritual life is, there's a story about a monk and someone who visited a monastery. And he's kind of looking at the monks, and the monks aren't doing much with their lives. And he goes up to the abbot one day, and he just goes, so what do you guys do here at the monastery? What do you guys do? And he said, there we go, that's it. Shaking him. And he said, "What do you guys do here?" And the monk said, "We fall and we get up." And I love that. That's the definition of spiritual life. We fall and we get up. And that's everything. Right? So in our marriages, we fall and we get up. And the sin isn't falling. The sin is not getting up. That's the key. I've always wanted to be a rock star. And now with this. Okay. All right, so our third talk, letting Christ in to heal the marriage. I want you to look at this icon. Where's Reem? I had this, I designed this icon. I'm very proud of it. I made up the whole thing. I had an iconographer do it. What do you see? What's happening? Christ is knocking on the door, and the verse above him, which I know you can't read, is saying, "Lo, I stand, behold, knocking at the door, waiting for you to open the door, to come in and have dinner with you and you with me." What do you notice about the door? Yeah, and there's no handle. So the door has to be opened from the inside. I mean, you can't even be on the inside and say, "Hey, yeah, come on in." You have to get up and you have to open the door yourself. And what about the other guy? Who's the other guy? It's an icon of Peter. It's right after he betrayed Christ. And he's ashamed. And he doesn't want to open the door. So why don't we let Christ in? Well, the first one is maybe we're scared of the consequences. Right? When we let Christ into our lives, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what he's going to do. Right? Because, when you think about the story on Palm Sunday, right, what happened? We said, "Hosanna in the highest." We let Jesus in. Jesus is a nice guy, right? He says nice things. He heals people. He gives food. He does good things, right? And what does he do? He flips tables. Starts flipping over tables. And that's what Christ does when he comes into our life. He flips tables. Which tables does he flip? The corrupt ones. And sometimes you think to yourself, I don't want to let him in. Because you see, there's a sin that I have that I kind of want to hang on to. I'm not interested in having him flip my tables. I'm not interested in having him come and change my life. I'm happy where I'm at. Why else? Maybe he's scared to be judged. He thinks when Christ comes in, he's going to judge him and he's going to condemn him. And as it says in the Gospel of John, that people love the darkness more than the light, and they don't want the light. And there are people who don't like the light because their deeds are evil. And so maybe this person thinks when Jesus, if I open the door, he's going to come and he's going to look at me judgmental. Right? The way our parents look at us. But there's another possibility, is he's just ashamed. He's ashamed because of what he's done. And this is the place we find ourselves often. Just shame. I don't want to let Christ in because of what I've done. I'm too embarrassed to let him in. And shame can paralyze us, especially in a marriage. The shame of things we've done, the shame of things that have happened in our past, the shame of things, the way we acted. And we don't want to let God in because I don't want to face him. And I don't want to face my partner. And I don't want to open up to what's going to happen. So the quote that's above Peter, and Peter isn't Peter, he's me. I'll read it to you. It says, I'll read you the whole quote. "You cannot escape shame except by shame. It is often the habit of the demons to persuade us either not to confess or to do so as if we were confessing another person's sin." Do people do this? Let me tell you what she said. Let me tell you what he said. Let me tell you what Susu said. Or to lay the blame for our sin on others. Let me tell you what my husband did. How many confessions start with, let me tell you what he did? Let me tell you what she did. That's the confession. He says, lay bare Lay bare your wound to the physician, and without being ashamed say, "It is my wound, Father. It is my plague, caused by my own negligence, not by anything else. No one is to blame for this, no man, no spirit, no body, nothing but my own carelessness." This is the openness of confession. When I lay open an open wound, a bare wound to the Father, and I say, "You come and fix it." And if that means you pour alcohol on it and it hurts real bad, then it hurts real bad. Right? And so shame stops us from accepting God in our lives. It's very powerful. Shame can destroy a marriage. Elder Porfirio says, "Let us stretch out to him and approach him as a friend. Do we fall? Do we sin? With familiarity, love, and trust, let us run to him, not with fear that he will punish us, but with the confidence which we deserve from the sense of being with a friend." Prior sins, prior transgressions, lives we've lived, things we've done even while married, they accumulate and they're destructive and they cause shame. And when the shame comes up, the walls go up and the blocking starts to happen. And I don't let my spouse or partner in. I don't want them to know everything about me. And I don't want God in either. And once I start blocking out God and I start blocking out my spouse, that's the beginning of the end, right? Because now the openness is gone, and just like any disease, right? You know, there's some diseases that have symptoms, but then there's some diseases that don't, right? And the ones with symptoms, those are great. You get a symptom, you go to the doctor, he gives you a shot, everything's great. It's the ones like cancer that just build inside quietly, and they're the ones that eat away at the marriage until there's really nothing left. And by the time you feel it, you go to the doctor and they say it's stage 4 and it's all over. And shame does that inside our marriages. And so it keeps us from letting the healer, the doctor, the true physician in to fix. And once I'm ashamed and once I go to my doctor and he says, "What's wrong?" and I have a pain in my chest, I say, "Nothing, doctor, I'm fine." Well, you know you're a fool, right? Because you need to tell the doctor what's happening. I love this quote by Father Stephen Freeman. He says, "You are not your sin." We can also experience at a toxic level shame that is self-inflicted. Any number of sinful actions can yield that result, and it is here that I want to intervene in this article and drive home a point. We are not our sin. Oftentimes we label ourselves as a sin. I'm this, I'm a liar, I'm an adulterer, I'm a whatever. And you are not that. You are the Son of God. And if my own kid said to me, "I'm just a piece of garbage," I would stop him and say, "You are not a piece of garbage. You're my son. Don't call yourself that, ever." And I'm sure when I call myself a piece of garbage, my Father in heaven looks at me and says, "Don't you ever call yourself that again. You're my son. You have my image and my likeness." And so whenever we have this very toxic shame, right, whenever we say things to ourselves like, "I can't believe I did that," you have to realize that although that sounds very humble, it's not. It's very arrogant. When someone says, "I can't believe I did that," what are you saying? I'm too good for that. I did that. It's kind of prideful, isn't it? In fact, what we should say is, we look at God and we say, "What'd you think I was going to do? You've met me. You know me. This is what I am. Here's your son. Accept me in my filth." And he does. No human being is evil by nature. Some of our kids are, but not all of them. We are, I shouldn't make jokes in the middle of important quotes. We are created fundamentally good, even very good in the language of Genesis. And though we may do many things, and many things may be done to us, none of them change who we are. Sin is not a constitutive part of our existence. It is extra-human and external to our nature. So don't ever accept the fact that I am sin, because you are not, right? You guys remember, Teta always has that silver set of shay, right, in the corner on the buffet. And it's ugly, right? It's tarnished, it's black, it's horrible, it's disgusting, but Teta keeps it, right? Because difaddab sahih, right? And you're just like, Tita, that's disgusting. No one's going to drink out of that. It's tarnished, it's black, it's really gross. Well, then Tita says, let me show you something. So she had bought this tarnish remover from the internet, right? And she goes, watch this. And she takes one shot, and there it goes, silver. And it's perfect, and it's beautiful. So underneath the garbage and the tarnish, it takes one wipe, and it goes right back to silver. And that's why Tita keeps it. And that's why God keeps us. Right? Because no matter how disgusting we are on the outside and how broken we are on the outside, it takes one wipe and we're back. Underneath, we're all silver. We're all gold. We're all our dad's image and likeness. We're all the son of the king. And we're nothing less than that ever. And so when we find ourselves really attacking ourselves and getting down on ourselves and you were this and you're disgusting and I can't believe you did that, that's from the devil. That is not from God. I'll tell you guys a story, nothing to do with this talk. There was a monk, an abbot of a monastery, who went into the world to trade, to do some, sell the works of the monks. So he went to a village, and he said, my monks make baskets, and they make crosses, and they make this, and I'd like to sell. So he started interacting with one of the the merchants there who has a store. And he stayed, and the two of them, for 2 weeks, they worked together, and he was talking with her, and they were, deciding what to sell and how much and sharife. And during the course of that 2 weeks, the monk, the abbot of the monastery, and this woman had an affair, a torrid affair. Okay? And were having sex all the time, and he fell with her in every which way. Of course, he felt bad. He goes back to his monastery, and to make matters worse, the monks are waiting for him with a zeph. Our Father has returned. Your prayers have sustained us. You are the saint of the monastery. You are the light of us. How did we live without? And he feels like garbage. Okay? And that night, he goes in his cell and he weeps and he repents. The next morning, he wakes up and Satan appears to him. And he says, what are you going to do if all the monks find out what you did? How are you going to feel when all the monks know all the stuff you did in the city? You know what he said? He said, I don't know what you're talking about. Satan goes, the woman, the affair, all the stuff you did. Monk goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I did no such thing. And he said, you had an affair with this woman for 2 weeks. And he said, I'm forgiven. God does not remember it, and neither do I. And Satan disappeared from him. So think about what's happening. Satan is reminding him of his sin. Satan wants him to stay down. Satan wants him to be in a position of, I'm garbage. And he's like, I am not garbage. I am forgiven. I am the Son of God. Look at the trust he has in his Father. I did no such thing. That never happened. I'm forgiven. And sometimes when we sin, the hardest part is forgiving ourselves. That's the part that takes therapy. That's why we go to the therapist. It isn't about, does God forgive me? It's about, I don't forgive me. I can't live with myself after what I did. And forgiving ourselves is sometimes the hardest part of a relationship, one with God and one with your spouse. So how do I fix the toxic shame? He has to cover me. How do I let him in? I let him in through the Eucharist, and I let him in through repentance. And then he comes in and he fixes. He cleans naturally. What does shame do? It leads to self-condemnation. It leads to isolation. It leads to condemnation and attacking of others. And the pain makes me lash out. When you see someone lashing out at someone, often they're in pain. And we have to realize that. When someone attacks us, our spouse included, something's hurt. Sometimes I watch my kids, and my son will come home, and he's just, Tasmanian devil. He's just a bat out of hell. He's just yelling. He hits his sister. He throws something. He's blah, blah, blah. And, of course, we're like, what are you doing? Stop. Go to your room. Give me your phone. We're doing all the things. And every once in a while, when I get wise, I think to myself, Habibi, what's wrong? What happened? He goes, kids were picking at me picking on me at school today. Ah, there it is. So it isn't, take your phone, punishment for attacking your sister. No. Let's talk about the kids that picked on you today. The pain created the pain. And this is just good advice, mistakes I made with my kids, right? When my kids are lashing out and I just want to stop it. Sometimes you don't have to just stop it. Sometimes you have to figure out what's causing it. And usually what's causing it is shame, embarrassment, pain, something. All right, so why don't we let them in? We're scared of the consequences. We're scared to be judged. We're ashamed. And then I want to focus on the fourth reason. Maybe we don't know it's Christ. Maybe I don't open the door because I don't know that that's Jesus. So I want to get to a point here. So during Lent, we read about the born blind man, right? And we heard this story, and then the disciples asked the question, who sinned? This man or his parents? So there's two options, this man or his parents. And so why did they ask? Well, because, what does every philosophy professor challenge the freshmen with? How does a good God do bad things? Correct? Isn't this what our kids always ask us? How do atheists ask us? How does a good God do bad things? And so the disciples were following the same train of thought and asked God, who sinned? Someone sinned. Good gods don't make people blind, obviously. So someone sinned, someone did something bad. There's a punishment here, for sure. They were following Philosophy 101 professor. And of course, Christ gave them the answer, neither. It's the glory of God to be revealed. And so we think about this. Why is there famine? Why is there war? Why is there all the bad things that we see in the news all the time? Why is there pedophilia? Why is there murder? Why is there all the things that we see that are so horrendous? And the reason we ask is because a good God can't do bad things, right? So was this blindness God's will? Did God want him to be blind since birth? Did God want the palsied man to be paralyzed for 38 years? Did God want that? Let's go back to Christ. Why did Jesus get crucified? Why are we here? Why is there a church? Lots of verses. So God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. He's the propitiation of our sins. I can never say that word. Not for ours, but only for those, but also for the sins of the whole world. For the wage of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. For our sake he made us to be sin, for he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So why did Jesus get crucified? All these good things, right? In fact, St. Athanasius tells us that the crucifixion of Jesus was not plan B, it was plan A. It's not like Adam fell, and then God said, oh shoot, Adam fell. What am I going to do now? I know. I'll have the Son of God come and he'll die. And this was always the plan, because this was always how God was going to manifest his love to us. Okay, so why am I saying all this? Can we agree that it was God's will that Jesus be crucified? This is the plan. This is why he came. Good? But how did it actually happen? Wasn't Judas greedy? Weren't the Pharisees jealous and full of hypocrisy? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening. Technology. Thank you for telling me. I was at a talk at the clergy meeting, and I was talking, and the slides had disconnected like 20 slides earlier. And all the priests were so embarrassed to say anything that they just sat there and just stared at me. Like, ما تقولوا حاجة. كلكم قاعدين ساكتين كده. Where's your beard mask? Gamda. All right. Let's go back. So how did Jesus get crucified again? Let's go through the story, the actual story. Oops. Judas was greedy, wasn't he? Oops. The Pharisees were jealous and full of hypocrisy. Weren't the chief priests afraid of the Roman wrath? Wasn't it ultimately Pontius Pilate's call, and his wife even told him, "Don't touch this man"? And he was his fear of another uprising. So wasn't it man's will? Who crucified Jesus? Judas, the Jews, the Pharisees, Pontius Pilate, Roman soldiers. Right or wrong? They did it right, and it was completely their choice. And were their choices God's will? What's God's will? Love your neighbor as yourself. Did the people, Judas, Pharisees, chief priests, Pontius Pilate, did they love their neighbor as theirself? Not so much. So whose will was it? It looked like a bunch of bad people did a bunch of bad things. That's how it looks to me, Malay. And so what could Christ have said? What was his response to all of this evil? He could have said, look, I don't accept the cross. It's not God's will. Judas did this, and the Pharisees did that, and the chief priest did that, and the Pontius Pilate did this. I'm not accepting it. These people are evil. They have evil motives. They have evil intentions. This is wrong. I'm not going to take it. He could have said that, right? That's what I would have said. I'm not interested. But he said something different. The night before he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible to you. If you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. So what did he say? All things are possible to you. What's he saying? You could stop this. You could stop this. You're assenting to this. You're letting this happen. So he recognized that the Father was allowing him to be crucified because of the deeds of evil people. And don't we see that this is what happens? That God assents to bad things? I mean, God allowed this, didn't he? Sounds pretty bad to me. Nice guy, heals people, his son, and then a bunch of bad people kill him for bad reasons. And God allowed it. And in the story of Job, we read the story of Job, right? Satan would go to God and do what? Ask permission. Can I kill his kids? And God says, yeah, go ahead. Can I kill his sheep? Go ahead. Can I kill his, goats and his servants? Yeah, go ahead. So whose will is it? God allowed it. God allows those things. So we all have crosses in our lives. What if I have a difficult husband or wife? What if I have a sick child, a difficult child on drugs, a child who's hurting himself or herself, hurting others? What if I have a boss who's a jerk, coworkers that are jerks, subordinates that are jerks? What if someone I know has cancer, has a disease, is dying? I have difficult in-laws. None of us have difficult in-laws. I don't. I have a great in-laws. See, now you can't tell if I'm kidding or not. Children that are on the wrong path. What about trouble in the service? Does that ever happen? Like every 7 minutes? Boss or coworkers that are out to get me. Friends that stab me in the back, that gossip about me. So these are all crosses in our life, right? Does God allow them? Are these God's will? These bad people doing these bad things. So how do I, as a Christian, see these things when they happen to me? Are those God's will for me? Does God want those people to do bad things? And here we have to distinguish something very important. So I'll tell you, anyone here see the movie Man of God? St. Nectarius? Okay, it's a great movie. I highly recommend you see it if you haven't seen it already. Very well done. And so after watching the movie, I was very inspired. So I went out and I bought his books on Amazon, on Kindle, and I was reading one about Lent. And this just hit me like a ton of bricks. And he writes extensively about this topic, and I had never seen the distinction until he wrote about it. He says you have to distinguish between the actual deed of someone and the situation that comes out of it as a result of a sinful act. So someone can do something that's bad, and that's not God's will, and they will be judged for that action. But then I, as a Christian, have to distinguish between that and what happens because of that. So it's not God's will that you ever hurt another person. God never wants you to do that. But what if someone at work lies about me? What if someone wants to cover themselves and they say, yeah, well, such and such did it? That person's lie creates a very difficult situation for you. You could even get fired because that person lied about you. And things like this happen. And God does not will that that person slander me. God does not want that person to lie about me. God does not want that person to hate me. And that person will be judged for their action by their own free will. But here comes the difference. The consequence of that difficult situation, God allowed that to happen. God allowed me to get fired. God allowed that persecution to come upon me. God assented to that, just like he assented to Job when the devil said, can I kill his kids? And he said, yeah. God allowed it. This situation comes to us from God's hands. So in some way, our lives are very arranged. And this is the mystery of the interaction between man's will and God's will. Because I know man has a free will. I know I can do anything I want. And yet I say that God is the Pantokrator. The Pantokrator, the bad translation is the Almighty, right? But the Arabic translation is much better. Dabit al-Kul, someone who dabbar everything, right? In fact, the icon is, he has the whole world in his hands, right? And if you look at the English of Pantokrator, pan means all, like everything. And tokrator comes from the word of ocracy, like democracy, theocracy, right? So democracy is rule of the people, or governing of the people, control of the people, right? And so when we say he is dabit al-kul, or he is pantokrator, he is controlling everything. So yet, even though every one of us has a free will, all of our lives are arranged. And this is a mystery. Just like Christ, even though each one of those people acted independently and evilly, that's not a word, in an evil fashion, yet all of it came together for the will of God that was from the very beginning of time. And so, this is very challenging to us because sometimes the things that God does to us, he does through evil people. And that's his will. So God's will allows events that are difficult and painful. He allowed Judas and the Pharisees to do what they wanted to do. The chief priests and the soldiers to smite him and to slap him and to curse him. He allowed all of it. And so this important principle is extremely in everything, right? We have to separate the person from the situation that arises. Yeah, the person messed up, fine. But that situation I'm in, that's from the hand of God. And I take it from the hand of God. God gave this to me. In the life of Baba Kryllos, you all know him. By the way, this is not a picture. This is a drawing. I have it at my house. It's very nice. Someone in Egypt, I can give you his name. He's very talented. He would have these, in the life of Baba, he would have like these priests who were saying horrible things about him, even slandering him, lying about him, publishing things about how he was a magician and a Satan worshiper and everything else. And yet Baba took it very much as if it's from God. He didn't want to stop it. And why would he endure these trials with such patience? Because when we're impatient, we don't hear what God's trying to tell us. When we see the person, we don't listen. When someone does something to us, and I don't see the action, but I see you, and you're ugly, and you're broken, and you're greedy, and you're whatever, I'm like, you know what, I'm not going to listen to you. But maybe I should. Maybe that situation is from the hand of God. And when we're agitated, we don't listen, we don't change, we don't adapt. And after a while, it gets dangerous.
we can fall into a victim mindset. And by the way, everyone's a victim now. With the young people especially, everything's about being a victim. And everyone blaming someone else. And we keep blaming all the way up. You know, when I do something, I go, well, you know, that's because the way I was raised, my parents are like this, and that's why I do this. And if I go talk to the parents say, well, you know, my dad was abusive, that's why, and my parents were like this. And we can keep going up to Adam. And people do. They say, if only Adam hadn't fallen, my life would be great. And we blame all the way up to Adam. Because why? Why is this happening? Because we're looking at the person and we're not looking at the situation. I mean, you even saw this in COVID, right? I mean, I hate to bring up COVID, right? But, you know, when mask mandates were first coming out, blah, 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 right? People were arguing, right? And you watch the way they argue, you know, they'd be like, well, you know, these politicians, you know, they're just trying to look like heroes, and they just want to pretend like they have all the answers, and they just want to get reelected, and they just want to show that they're in control, and they just want to show that they have power, and they want to control us. Okay, yeah, that's true. And they're corrupt. Yeah, they're corrupt. Wear a mask. Right? That doesn't mean don't wear a mask. But people would commingle those two things, right? The politician who said he's just corrupt and he's just trying to show off, and he said, okay, yeah, that's true, but you still wear a mask. That doesn't mean the mask isn't effective, does it? Right? Separate the issues. Okay? And you see, you know, like this happens all the time, right? You know, the vaccine comes out. All these are companies. They just want to make money. They just want to profit. They just want to, you know, yeah, that's right. They want to make money and they want to profit. That doesn't mean the vaccine doesn't work. It just means the company wants to make money and profit. Those are two separate issues. Separate them, right? I mean, I was arguing with someone. I shouldn't say it. You know, it was a couple fighting, and you know, she really wants him to fund the 529 plan, and he's just like, well, that's because she's greedy and she wants the money and she blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, she's the devil. Hey, fine. Is funding a 529 plan for your kid a bad thing, or can we focus on the issue? Is this a good thing, or yeah, it's a great thing? Then let's do it. But that's because she's trying to control me and she's trying to blah, blah. Okay, just keep her aside, right? Focus on the issue. Right? So why don't we let Christ in? Maybe we don't know it's Christ. Sometimes we think it's just the bad person, or the bad husband, or the bad wife, or the bad spouse, or the bad boss, or the bad child. Let me see if I... Oh yeah, so I want to tell you the story about David in the book of Samuel. It's this great little story. There's this man who came out, so after David was king, this man came out from the family of Saul. You know, Saul was the king before David, right? And he started like cussing David out, right? He started throwing rocks at him. It's kind of like a scene from Monty Python. It's kind of funny. And he's cussing him out, and he's saying a bunch of things that actually aren't true about David. You know, you have blood on your hands, and although he didn't. And so the guard, David's guard, says this great line, which I love. He says, why should this dead dog curse my lord and king? Let me go over there and cut his head off. Right? Which is what you'd expect a good guard to say, right? King, the chief of the guard's like, let me go kill him. I'll just go kill him. Right? This is how, you know, these guys handle problems. Very angry. But then David said something that's just mind-blowing. He says, what does this have to do with you? Like, you stay out of this. If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, curse David, then who can ask, why do you do this? And then he continued, leave him alone, let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. So look how David took it. There's a guy, he's throwing rocks, he's cursing, he's wrong, all on all objective fronts, nothing good here. And what is David hearing? The Lord told him to curse me. Leave him alone. Let him curse me. I need to learn a lesson. See the perspective? He separated the person from what was happening. And so for every one of us, we have these bitter cups in life. Be a kid, spouse, husband, in-laws, mother-in-law, especially mother-in-laws. And the problem is that we have difficulty recognizing it's from God, especially when it comes from another person. Say, that's not from God, that's from my mother-in-law, Wadi bint A. So a spiritual writer says, and this is St. Nectarius, it was not the Father's will that anyone kill his son, nor did he inspire anyone to kill him. He did will, however, that Jesus would freely be the sacrifice for the sins of mankind. He willed that Jesus would let himself be put to death. Right? So then we often miss what's most essential here, to accept and assent to God's will in our lives, because we see it from another person. But we have to learn that the situation, that came from God. God allowed it. It is God's will. Okay. I love this quote. I say it all the time. If we die before we die, then we won't die when we die. It's on the monastery of the wall of a monastery in Mount Athos, which is, if you don't know, is a peninsula in Greece full of tons of monasteries, very holy place. If we die before we die, then we won't die when we die. So, as we talked about in the talk before, marriage has a lot of death to it. Death to the old members of the self, death to selfishness, death to the ego, death to the my will, my way, my desires. I'll tell you the story about Abbot Trifon. Does anyone know who Abbot Trifon is? He's fantastic. He's a abbot of a monastery in Vashon Island near Seattle. He's got a podcast, he's got a book, he's really something else. He's a living saint as far as I'm concerned. But I'll tell you the story. He lives in Seattle on this island, and he was driving around, and he went to a Starbucks. So he sat down at the Starbucks, and he sits down, he's having his coffee. And you know, Stables and Starbucks are pretty close to each other, right? So he's sitting here, and there's a guy sitting right here, and a guy in front of him. And so a guy right in front of him he tells his friend, he goes, loudly, only a stupid old man would believe in God. Right? And he says that loud enough for Abbot Trifon, very loud for him to hear. Abbot Trifon doesn't react, he just drinks his coffee. After a few minutes, he gets up, he goes to the cashier, and he says, can you do me a favor? He gives him some money, and he says, I'd like to buy 2 gift cards for those 2 gentlemen over there, but I don't want you to give them the gift card until after I leave, 5-10 minutes after I leave, give them the gift card. She said, okay. So he left. He said, like 3 or 4 months later, he was driving around, he's near Starbucks, says, I'll go in, he gets a cup of coffee. Who does he see? The 2 guys again. So they come rushing up to him, and they say, I want to know why you bought us those gift cards. And he said, my God is a God of love. We return love for evil. That's the only way I know how to respond. And so the first guy, the guy who had said only a stupid old man would believe in God, basically opened up to him, started crying, telling him about his life, asking his advice, asking for his prayers. And for 3 hours he talked to this guy. Okay? So what's the important part of this story? When Abbot Trifon was told only a stupid old man would believe in God, how did he react? He didn't. He didn't. I would have. I would have said, excuse me, you got something to say? Do you know how much I bench? You punk kid. Think you know everything? Right? So, do you even lift, bro? So I would have said a lot of things, right? But Abbot Trifon didn't. Why not? Because the part of him that would say all those things is what? Dead. He killed it. He used to be a bouncer. He used to be a musician. He used to live the life. He fought a lot of men. He's a strong guy. But he killed that part of him. It's just like St. Moses the Black killed that part of him that wanted vengeance. And that's the part that's the key. I haven't killed that part of me. I would have said something back. And so marriage is a lot of this, right? So when he heard that, he didn't see the people who did this. He saw God giving him an opportunity to speak to someone's heart. So let's summarize. Many crosses come to us because of evil people doing evil things. That's okay. Let us distinguish between the person who is doing the evil and the situation that arises that I must accept as coming from the hand of God himself. I don't get to say, well, that's because that person's bad. We're all bad. We all do dumb things. Let us follow the words of Christ, Abba, Father, remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. So I can say, I don't want to be fired from my job because someone lied, but not what I will, but what you will. And let us take the cross to the path of victory and not to the path of despair, depression, victimization, blaming others, and becoming bitter. Do people do that? Do people look at the cross and say, not interested? Yeah, like the first cross. Like the cross Jesus was on. How many thieves were there? One of them said what? Remember me when you come into your kingdom? He's the good one. What did the other one say? I want off. Get me down. I don't want this cross. I don't want to be with you. So crosses come into our lives, and we go one of two directions. The cross does that. It splits us, and we have to pick a side. The crosses come, and not everyone picks. You'll say, I knew someone who got cancer, and he ended up denying God and hating God, and blah, blah. Yeah, I know. It happened at the very first cross, as a matter of fact. Crosses do that. They don't always end nicely. Sometimes people pick wrong. People pick wrong all the time, right? But we have to distinguish and say, I'm going to take the cross to the right and not to the left. Things Jesus never said. Listen to your heart, be true to yourself, trust your gut, feel good about who you are. Happiness is what matters, just be a good person. He said, if anyone would come after me, free will, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me daily. So those first few sentences are not what marriage is about. The last one is. Accept or reject the cross, so now it's my turn. I must use my own free will to accept what God has given me to do the right thing. How? This is my challenge and yours, to see the cross, and the cross could be your spouse, and do the right thing. And I wanted to point this out on Good Friday, if you notice. The church, in a very simple way, tries to point this out to us, right? In the beginning of Good Friday, the church is in what? Black. And then halfway through Good Friday, the church does what? Takes down the black and puts up the white. And here's the weird part. They put up the black while Jesus is alive, and then when he dies, they put up the white. It's kind of weird. Doesn't make sense. So, is the cross light or darkness? It's both. Is it good or bad? It's both. Right? There's two thieves. There were disciples. Some betrayed Christ, and some followed him to the cross. There were some Pharisees who said, crucify him, and there were some Pharisees that took his body down and buried him. And there were some soldiers that put a spear in his side, and some soldiers that said what? Truly this was the Son of God, St. Longinus, who later died as a martyr for Christ. So the cross does that. It splits. And we, with our own free will, get to pick every single time. St. Paul says, but we preach Christ crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block, to Gentiles foolishness, but to those who are called power and wisdom of God. So St. Paul asks, is the cross a stumbling block or wisdom? Is the cross power or foolishness? Is the cross light or darkness? It's both. And who gets to pick? We do. We do. All right. Okay, so I'll end with this. Maybe I won't. This letter is a very famous letter. It's called This Was From Me. As Abuna pointed out, we'll be sending out the slides. So I know some of you want to take some of these pictures, but you can if you want, whatever. But we'll send them out as well. It was a letter written by Saint Seraphim to his spiritual child who was in prison. He was in a Russian prison, which you can imagine is not a pleasant place. During the communist time, the Russians did horrible things. They killed thousands and thousands of priests, executed them like wholesale. So he wrote this letter to help him. He said, this was from me. Have you ever thought that everything that concerns you concerns me also? You are precious in my eyes, and I love you. For this reason, it is a special joy for me to train you. When temptations and the opponent, the evil one, come upon you like a river, I want you to know that this was from me. I want you to know that when you are in difficult conditions among people who do not understand you and cast you away, this was from me. I am your God. The circumstances of your life are in my hands. You did not end up in your position by chance. This is precisely the position I have appointed for you. Your environment and those who are around you are performing my will. Do you have financial difficulties and can barely survive? Know that this was from me. Have you ever spent the night in suffering? Did your friend or someone whom you opened your heart deceive you? This was from me. Your plans were destroyed, your soul yielded, and you are exhausted. This was from me. Unexpected failures found you, and despair overcame your heart, but know that this was from me. Serious illness found you, which may be healed or may be incurable, has nailed you to your bed. This was from me. You were dreaming about doing something special for me, and instead of doing it, you fell into a bed of pain. This was from me. Remember always that every difficulty you come across, every offensive word, every slander and criticism, every obstacle to your work, which could cause frustration and disappointment, this is from me. Know and remember always, no matter where you are, that whatsoever hurts will be dulled as soon as you learn that in all things, look to me. Everything has been sent to you by me for the perfection of your soul. All these things were from me. So there's the beautiful story about Michelangelo. He's a sculptor, as you know, and he was chiseling away at this very famous statue of St. Mary and Christ. And he had this line, and he said, "A few more days and life will break through." I like that. A few more days and life will break through. And so as he's chiseling, he sees the image that he wants. And what's he chiseling away? The bad stuff, the parts that don't fit. And so in life, we have these things come to us. We have people in our lives that hurt, people in lives that challenge, people in our lives that make things difficult. And so why is God doing this to me? I thought good God doesn't do bad things. He doesn't. If I was this piece of marble, every time Michelangelo hit me with a hammer and a chisel, what would I say? Ow. Right? And I'd say, why is this man hitting me with a chisel and a hammer? But the man sees the image that he's trying to get to. And that little piece of marble right there, that doesn't fit. Take it out. And each one hurts. And each one brings us closer. So this is how we reconcile why someone has a child with a disease or a parent that's sick or anything like that. Christ sees us and he is chiseling away the old man and the new man comes through. I'll just end there because I know we're short on time. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything to add? How am I supposed to look at you and smile? What am I supposed to do? Okay. Glory be to God forever. Amen.